Welcome to UberCube, the podcast we discuss all things Cube, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, feeling much better this week, and I am joined by both of my favorite humans. Let's start out with our most favorite human of, you know who you are, May. I'm just going to say your name.
I'm allergic to being the favorite.
And I'll just hey, it's Stu. I'm just going to get myself out of the way so we can introduce the important person.
The one we like the most,
episode.
secretly.
The one that you like the most.
I do. I'm a fanboy.
And honestly, the one that I just always like the most.
Hey, can we get your autograph digitally? Can you give me a digital signature, please? That'd be great.
Yeah, I'm sure I could do that.
Sign the camera like they do at sporting events, you know.
Who do we have on today?
Justin Parnell, I've been here a couple of times before. Always happy to be back, talk about Cube. My favorite way to talk about Magic, and really the only Magic that I interact with at all anymore. So,
and we told you don't have to hit record. That made you a little bit better.
Yeah, that was great. I know. So usually when I do a podcast, I'm just like, I got to do all this back end stuff, and I just forget when I record with you guys, I don't have to do anything. So It's really great.
Easy,
no work.
easy.
Low effort.
Yeah, just show up, you got to talk about Cube.
You're assuming that we actually release these episodes. We're just not creepily making tapes and keeping them in the closet.
I mean, honestly, you know what? It's fine. Like, if I just want to talk about Cube, though. So if I just get a second day of the week to talk about Cube in addition to my one regular day, then I'll take that.
So we're going to talk about a very special cube today. The cube that has no name. Walking through the desert with a cube with no name. We'll think of something, but tell us about this nameless cube. What are we dealing with here?
So we're going to take people back. We'll pull the curtain back a little bit. So Anthony, a couple of months ago, was talking about UberCubeathon. And I was not able to make the last one, and I really wanted to make this one. It's going to work out. And this cube that we're going to be talking about is going to be at that event. And in the process of this, he was asking me, he's like, hey, what is this cube called? And up until that point, I didn't really have a name for it. It was just the Parnell cube. Like, that's all that it was. But of course, in this day and age of creatively naming your cube, that was not very descriptive. You know, when we have the Fey cube, you have a pretty good idea of like something that's going on in that cube, or the Uber Bear artifact cube, you have an idea what's going on in that cube. The Parnell cube doesn't tell you anything other than I put the cube together. So I scramble. I ask people in my play group, I'm like, what should this cube be called? People give answers that I'm not satisfied with. So then I just tell Anthony, I'm just like, the artifact synergy cube. And then in the beginning of the show, he's asking me, he's like, so I'm going to challenge you on this name. And I said, please don't, because I'm terrible at this. And I don't even think the name is good. I don't even think it's a good representation of what this cube is. I was just like, I have to make a decision. So I just came up with something. But it's not a great name for the cube, the artifact synergy cube. I don't even want to call it that anymore. Even though that's what literally in the show notes here, it is literally called that. So I'm just ruining everything right off the bat.
No, you're not. I'm going to do the opposite. We're going to tear into that one pretty good.
Peak entertainment.
I think personally, there's a little bit of swag here, a little bit of style that you got going on. I think
please don't call it
you
swag.
having a blank TLDR or the absence of a TLDR, and for that matter, if you didn't have a name at all, there's a level of cool here, right? Like, you're not just the fact that we got you to come out of Excel or Google Docs is like a thing, right? You should just name it like not Google Docs. That would be like
not Google Docs.
The funny thing is, you were like, you asked Stu in the beginning, do you have the cube pulled up? And I was thinking to myself, I have the cube pulled up, but I have it pulled up on my Excel version, not the Cube Cobra version. Nice. Although I have that pulled up too, but the sheet that I'm on is my Excel sheet.
So we're going to call it the Microsoft Excel Cube. I think that's fantastic. We might just have to coin that one right now.
Hang on. We're missing a huge opportunity, right? The Clippy Cube.
The Clippy Cube.
For all the OG Microsoft Office users, hi, I'm Clippy.
Clippy was mainly on Word, which is a terrible program, and not on Excel, which is an exceptional program.
But people don't know that.
Or
people
how about
that's true.
We could call it the no macros cube. We can keep going with it.
You can use macros.
The Visual Basic cube, or the basically visual cube.
At this point, I think everybody's just lost in the sauce.
Yeah, we're having fun.
We're too deep down the rabbit hole.
Justin's 8-bit cube. All right, we got it.
One of my friends actually had a cube that was the 8-bit cube because it was based on video games. So I can't even call it that. So that's also out the window.
No.
It doesn't matter.
I like that concept.
It's Parnell's cube, okay?
All right.
And I'll tell you about the cube. So where do we want to start?
Let's start with libations.
Yeah, we just skipped right through that.
I already been getting mine. Now, as last time, I have Arizona tea, Arnold Palmer,
Ooh.
a little half and half. So that's what I got here.
Cheers to that.
And some brandy.
No.
May, what about yourself? What you got going on tonight?
So I'm actually having another Say Yes Sour by Lua Brewing Company.
Ooh.
I love sours.
Me too. I'm a big sour fan. Anthony, what you got?
I'm going to have a Highland Brewing oatmeal porter. I'm going to have a vodka and soda, and I'm going to have a Tomaton single malt scotch. I don't know why all this is happening. I literally told Stu I'm not drinking. So I have 3 drinks sitting here off in the distance. I'll figure out which one I want.
Yeah, I'm very sorry that I started shoving drinks in your hand as soon as you showed up to my house this evening.
I don't like people like you.
And I got my one of my favorites. It's the Hidden Pipe Coffee Porter from Raleigh Brewing, so I'm going to crack it.
I'm going to do the same thing, except mine won't make the sound. One of the things that I actually want to talk about is an overarching theme so that we don't just dive strictly in the cube. It's a conversation absolutely. Let me lay this out for you. So I was just featured on Cube Viewers. Our good friend Ian just hosted it this week. He had me on his show, and we talked about Uberbear's Horror Cube. And because he talked about the cube and he asked me questions about it, it kind of opened up the floodgates on a cube that I frankly haven't updated in quite some time. But then people start looking at the cube list, i.e. in the MTG Cube Talk Discord. Our good friend Judge Bone starts looking at it, and he starts looking for things that don't necessarily align with, I guess, the thematic viewpoint of Innistrad. And I'm getting to a point here. So he's looking at cards like Chain Lightning and saying, this doesn't belong in the cube. And then it actually doesn't. I'll let that one fly. But then it goes into Swords Plowshares. This doesn't belong in the cube. And then I find myself defending Swords Plowshares going, oh, I have that art that looks stained glass mirror. This is what the Cathars would have had in their church. This is kind of the vision I have from the curator. But then I find myself in a defensive posture, conversationally explaining the reason why I'm choosing these cards is because my play group, my group of people that I hang out with quite regularly, liked stronger Magic. And I don't mean that in a negative. There's such a connotation attached to what I just said out loud, but they want to play higher tier, higher powered cards. And the challenge that I want to kind of fold into your cube, based on the Artifact Synergy cube, is by that title alone. When I see cards in there that are considered air quote staples, powerful, you'd see in a Eternal, Vintage, Legacy cube, etc., the question comes along from the person, that reader-writer relationship, when they're viewing your cube, Justin, in the case of the Horror Cube, is the expectation is set by that tone. I think this card's too strong for your cube, or why am I playing these cards at all, or why would we call it an Artifact Synergy, even though I know that's now declared is not the thing. You see, there's a thing there, though.
I feel like there's a bit of a dichotomy there, though, right? Because you're saying that the players want to play with the most powerful cards, which I don't disagree with. Swords to Plowshares is not just a very powerful card, it's a very efficient card. And a powerful card, you could say, I want to build this cube where I've got this 5, 6, 7 mana power band, which is actually, I'm developing a cube right now, and that's kind of where I want these monster pieces to show up. But what I don't want is for the cube to promote an environment like I've experienced in other cubes where my monster 6, 7, 8 drops that I want to be these massive game changer, big fun pieces are just answered by these 1 and 2 mana powerful counterspell / removal spells.
I want to go a little bit more meta than that, just to present the open-ended question to you, Justin. I'm talking about inferring a theme within your cube and basically inadvertently misleading drafters. An example would be, as said, Uberbear's Artifact Cube. This came up. This was kind of a thing that happened at one of the Cube Cons where I had Mystic Confluence in there. An individual sat down to play my cube and then came across in an Artifact Synergy cube, came across Mystic Confluence, and then saw that as an eyesore, even though not understanding is a bad choice of words. Not understanding the contextualization of me as the curator, where I'm trying to incorporate push cards into an environment. How do you feel about that statement? You see where I'm going with all this?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with words mean things. So when you put a title on something, you are creating an expectation that, fair or not, the product that you're delivering is going to have to live up to some of the people that are engaging with it. That's the case with everything. Cube is, just a tiny fraction of all of the things that what I just said could. That being said, I would say that it is incredibly difficult for cubes that are not hyper focused in a singular area to ever meet that criteria that's being set upon by just a name, which is why I struggled so much, because there's not a term or satisfying name that I can put on my cube that is going to communicate everything that the cube is doing or how the cube is playing by just reading it.
Okay.
So,
sorry to interject.
Go ahead.
But I got you.
Okay, great.
So, when it comes to naming cubes like this, where there's not really a thematic identity that kind of top-down explains, oh, it's the Fey cube, therefore it's a bunch of fairy tales and it's a bunch of fairies and whatnot. There's not really a thematic identity there. However, you have a bunch of synergy pieces, right? You have a bunch of things that happen to overlap, and you can see this across all of your colors. And the thing that I noticed is that you have the consistent theme of things that care about artifacts, things that care about counters, and your various tech pieces. So you're going to call it the Act Cube. Like capital A, capital C, capital T.
Sounds like a piece of legislation.
It does.
I like it.
Yeah. That's
Artifacts, counters, and tech, so am I.
That's fair. I mean, but then the thing is, there's still other factors that I feel like are still left on the cutting room floor.
Yeah.
Even at that.
And there's a secondary problem with someone else naming your cube. They've now taken away a degree of your relationship. Because it would have came to you, right? I mean,
you know what? I'll give May authority over the naming. That's certainly not a skill set of mine.
Faye too.
Electric
That's okay.
Boogaloo.
You can shut me down on that one. Miss all the shots you don't take.
Yeah, that's fair. But so this is kind of now. I want to pose a question.
Yeah.
Off of your question, and Anthony, I'll challenge you on this now.
Sure.
Do you think that it is the responsibility of the cube owner to fully provide an isolated representation of what the cube is before someone drafts it? And that's not an explanation. That's something that someone can look at in a brief second and get an understanding of.
Yeah, I think you can provide a conversational tone. I think it's really hard. You got some that are easy, right? Peasant, pauper, outside of those
Right.
plus symbols, right? Vintage.
Right.
Those have just kind of criteria and baggage attached to them, tethered to them, a belief system, right, wrong, or indifferent. When you start getting into names like Uberbear's Artifact Cube, I am definitely kind of putting myself into, this is going to be Kaladesh, no longer Kaladesh, whatever its name now. Arishnikar, what is it now? I can't remember. Or it's Mirrodin, or you're doing something like that, right? So I'm kind of setting that tone. If I say Uberbear's Horror Cube, the assumption once was this is going to be mostly Innistrad. It does kind of paint you in a corner where the name, but I wanted to make it, when I first made these, I didn't think about a name. I was thinking more of what is a name, right? Let's go more poetry. I just wanted to say there's artifacts in this cube. I just would love to, in the beginning, just said there's a whole bunch of artifacts loaded inside this cube. Have fun with it. It's going to be complex. But I think via the evolution of a cube, because none of them stay the same, they're living. They're always going to change. Your cube we're looking at right now will not be the same in 5 years. It just simply won't even be this cube anymore. 70% of these cards will probably be something different just because you like to mod and change. We'll just pretend you do. So if you name something, have you just literally made a gravestone or a tombstone for it, and is that locked in? I don't think so. I just think it's a simple, fast pitch. People will get 80% of this cube is about artifacts. People get 50% or more of this cube is about graveyard synergies. And I think don't overcomplicate it or oversell it there. There's no good way to name it. It's a book cover. That's it.
Yeah. But I've worked in retail for over 20 years, and the book cover means a lot.
It does.
Book cover means a lot. And that's actually something that I was going to mention, is that to a degree, it is our responsibility as a curator to kind of give at least enough of an idea of what people can expect in this environment. And using name is a form of leverage for that. When you can basically take off a lot of that intro conversation just by explaining, oh, this is the artifact cube, you can expect to do artifact things. It can take off a lot of the legwork of having to explain what the cube is, what people are going to expect, and whatnot. It can be a good tool for that. However, it is not the end-all be-all, because you, as a curator, are still going to have that conversation to people who've just walked in, never played your cube before, and you're trying to explain, like, your little elevator pitch of, here's what to expect when playing my cube.
I agree.
Right?
There was one recently that came up. This individual said, hey, let's play my Star Wars cube. We didn't get around to it because of time constraints. This was at our Ravenfest thing. It didn't take me much to envision what someone would try to do with a Star Wars cube. I mean, I don't know if it's accurate, but I would have pictured vehicles. I would have pictured the most science fiction-y type of stuff, or some kind of representation of like Tatooine. Maybe there'll be some desert stuff in there. Maybe they're trying to do some of these, city planet type deals, right? Jedi, lightsabers, whatever they can find. The Ghostbusters cube is a friend of ours. They have it, and on the nose, before they even had the set that came out, Universes Beyond or Secret Lair or whatever it was, came out. It just was on the tin that the expectation there'd be spirits in there and stuff that looks like it's coming back from the dead. And we knew this person would try to incorporate the Ghostbusters from all the different, properties of Ghostbusters.
Helps to know the person, like, in that way, though, right? So if you're familiar with the curator, then it's great, because I know the individual that you're talking about that has that Ghostbusters cube. He's a big Ghostbusters fan, so I kind of understand his mentality of where a cube like that would want to go, how he would want to curate it, what the list would look like. But we're not just talking about a play group necessarily, right? You could just be walking up to a group of strangers, maybe in Charlotte in 2 weeks, like we might be doing, or in Richmond, Virginia, that we've done on,
Speaking of which, we're talking about going to SEG Charlotte, I think, if you want to try
I'll be there.
All right,
Wink,
well,
wink.
then we will
Oh,
definitely
baby.
then it's on. We'll
It's
be there.
on.
We'll see you there.
Right.
Easy peasy. We'll just make that announcement now. We'll take a train is what we're going to do. And what are the
Love a train.
before we kind of move past this, that was just something that kind of happened from the name and you presenting it. And then, in true Justin style, it's a blank slate, no TLDR. And I'm okay with that. I think there's more of a kind of a cool jazz vibe. Like, you don't have to name this thing at all. Like, what does that matter?
Oh, I don't know. You told me I needed to.
I
so
thought-
Yeah, I was like, hang on, Anthony.
I
You
thought-
just
I thought you
basically yelled at JP.
I did. I yelled at him. We had a
About
long
this
intervention
man.
about it. I
I
don't think
was actually scared for the first time in my life. I was like, wow, I've never experienced such
it's just
strong
a bear
emotion coming
rage,
from another
bear rage.
person.
I'll be honest, I haven't really thought about that as much as I have in the last 19 minutes and 7 seconds that we've been recording this episode, because you look at, right, Artifact, I think you kind of really put this quite eloquently. Artifact Cube is about artifacts.
Yeah.
Horror Cube, it's going to be about Innistrad or those kind of sets,
stuff.
right? So you can think about that from a thematic perspective. You can think about it from a set-based perspective. But the more kind of complex and non-just art-driven that the cube might be, and more that the cube is less set-driven, potentially, right? Then it might be difficult to walk into a room, even of enfranchised Magic players, and say, hey, I have this cube, and for them to automatically get an idea, okay, because if you come to me and say I have a horror cube, I think, okay, I think werewolves and zombies and so on and so forth, and May says fey cube, and I think fairies and so on and so forth. There's only so many terms that you can use that are going to be so descriptive.
Correct.
Right.
Like there's finessing in that. I think, and I want to give a shout out to the most beautiful one I think I've ever encountered, and I'll throw countered in there, is the Counters of Monte Cristo. I don't think anybody's done a better job than that, Frank. I can't remember who's. I think that might be Cade's. I'm uncertain. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I apologize. But that name, something about it just really encapsulates it, because when I do my cube development, Justin, and I'll explain why I'm saying this. I come from the title down. I like to build that way. I like to I like to write. And before I write a story, and I like write short stories, I try to think of my title, and that kind of leads me into my story. That's just how I like to kind of take on those projects.
And I want to defend you from what I said a minute ago, which I mainly wanted to get a reaction from Stu and May, which I did. So, right. But I know why I needed to title it, because if this cube is going to be in an event where people are looking at cubes that they're going to be playing, something that just is Parnell's cube, that does nothing. That doesn't tell anything. It's not descriptive in any sort of way, and it does require them to have to dig a little bit deeper to get an understanding of it. So I totally understand the why. But on my side, I am so the complete opposite. Like, I'm mechanic driven 100%. If I didn't have to title this cube, I would never title this cube.
That's funny you should mention that. Your good friend
Only
Kirby,
because it's just
Kirby
like
and
not
Shoop,
where I am.
Kirby and Shoop and I were hanging out. We were playing in a pub a couple of weeks ago in Raleigh, and Kirby said that exact same thing to me. He kind of talked across the table, and he said, Anthony, you designed from top-down name. I designed mechanic forward. And he develops a lot. You guys have the similar style when you build your
We do, for
your
sure.
environments.
Yeah.
I think that's it. Which Kirby's cube is also going to be featured in the event as well, too. The creative cube, and it follows kind of the similar attributes. But I think something in that name is kind of special. The creative cube. It's like you just took you guys ever, when I was a kid, I bought Legos, and I got Legos for Christmas. I had a rich uncle because Legos were still expensive then too. But rich uncle would give us Legos. But grandma had the old Legos, the ones that people don't really want to play with the green flat thing and just the regular bricks. I later got space Legos. What do I do as a kid? I completely just blend them together. And I just make these amalgamations of these Legos. I just dumped them together. And that was just creative to me. I never followed the instructions. Now I'm sitting here with my 17-year-old kid the other day, and we're building a camera and a bonsai tree, and he's literally using an app, and it's telling him where to place the block. It's creative, but now he's following instructions to build something that someone else has roadmapped. But whenever I dumped over my Legos, I literally built anything in my imagination. So when I call something the creative cube, shout out to Kirby, it just says, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. 10,000 Legos poured on the floor, build what you want, whatever you dream of.
All right, let me not necessarily counterpoint, but now this is very specific from a naming point, right? So if you tell me, hey, would you guys like to play the Artifact Cube? That immediately tells me that it's an Artifact themed cube. If you tell me I want to play the Horror Cube or the Fake Cube, I would like a little bit of information about what the cube is like, but if you tell me, hey, we're going to play the creative cube, I'm going to expect some kind of explanation. I would like one, right? Hey, cool, I would love to play your cube. Can you tell me in 30 seconds or less, even if it's just, here's what the color pairs do, here's the power level, here is some kind of expectation about what the cube's direction is and what the vibe of the cube is, right? I'm not going to, I would say demand that. Maybe demand is not quite the correct term for that, but I like that.
Expect it on my desk by tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
You can't handle the
that.
truth.
I like that.
I got it. But what about something more eloquent, Justin? Your good friend McDarby.
He's really exceptional at that.
He's the really dream cube. It doesn't require explanation because now it's like the creative cube, but now it's kind of went more. Think about what he's done now. He's now elevated it. Justin, what do you dream? What would be the most bombastic play you could do in Magic?
Right. Well, in his cube, it's actually play a 2-power creature on turn 2 and attack, which is what I tell him every time.
That does.
My dream is to kill you before you can cast your spell.
I assure you that dream doesn't work. I tried Luris against. Matter of fact, I played against you and McDarby. I don't know if we were in Charlotte or Richmond, but you guys rumple stomped me with my cute little Luris deck because you two actually were dreaming, and I was trying to be nightmares, and it does not work.
There was a period of time. I don't think I have it now, but I had the highest win percentage of any person like playing in his cube and paper. I love to live the dream.
You played it once
like
and you won. That's
fun.
Really good record, man. I like it.
No, I've played it a lot. I've played it well into the double-digit amount of times.
So let's dig into your cube now. That's a good little preface kind of for the blank slate of, and I would love to help you with this, but I don't want to. I've actually used all my credits recently. Our good friend Nathan had the almost legendary cube, and I took it upon myself because I had insomnia to take his cube, clone it, and then pseudo reinvent it and cut some cards that he loved a lot. And I overstepped some boundaries, and then I presented said cube to our group, and their feelings were involved, which is understandable. So I've burned all my. I'm done. I'm kind of putting myself in the back seat right now. So
whoa!
I'm going to ask these other two.
No. You don't get to do that. I literally just posted the first
I did that
as
too.
close as
I kept it private.
You don't need to keep it private.
I chose to
I
keep
will
yours
go
private.
very public with that because I'm very happy to get to get all the feedback from that.
I didn't want to gut him. Stu's got a cube he's working on. He says, "Hey, Anthony, look at this one." So I'll tell you, we've digressed. Podcasts do this. So a good friend Nathan actually limited myself mentally.
We haven't even got past the.
We're going to mentally though.
We've gotten so off topic.
I told myself, Anthony, do not suggest more than 50 cards to a person that didn't ask you to. So I chose to clone his cube. And
50,
I did 50.
Don't more than 50. That kind of tells you something about, and they're like, I'm only going to limit myself to like 15% of the entire card number in your cube. And here's why
I may have overstepped.
You should change it.
So Stu then says, I want some feedback. So now I feel a little jaded from what I did before because I got my hand slapped. He goes, give me some feedback. I go, I'm going to do 15 cards. That's exactly what I did. I literally stopped myself from talking about your cube. I could have.
The funniest part about this entire derail is just that we've spent so long talking about the potential of the name, whether or not the name's actually important, and then now we're just talking about how Anthony has basically done the equivalent of the passive-aggressive post-it note.
I did.
Form.
So I will not hijack your cube name. These other two will have to take it for you. Let's talk about the Justin's cube right now. Let's move on. This has been fun. Great 27-minute segue.
Yes, the legislation cube, as I'm going to call it for the duration of this episode.
I do like that.
I love it.
I don't think it's descriptive, but I do like the name.
I like it.
So
I like it too.
Goals for the cube. Let's just do that. Let's do flat. You're the curator. Goals.
Great. Okay. So ironically, through this entire time, while we were so focused on the name that I didn't have, no one asked me if I had a brief description of the cube, which not only do I, but I've repeated so many times that the people in my primary play group can also say the exact description again as well. So I can't do it in 30 seconds, but I can do it in a minute, Stu.
That's close enough. That's good.
We charge you after 30.
Honestly, I'm going to be honest with you. No one can do it in 30 seconds.
Okay.
It's not possible to do it.
Maybe Eminem could, or like
I've tried.
All right, okay.
Little Nicky can do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You know what? If you can get one of them to do it in that amount of time, I will record a video and say that
challenge
I was
accepted.
wrong. You were right. Yeah.
Calling Eminem.
Okay, great.
Come out with your apology video. I was wrong.
All right, big question. Goals of the cube.
Right,
1
so-
minute.
What are they?
Great.
Yeah.
Excellent. So the Parnell cube is a approximately legacy power level cube. So what that means is that it is embodying what the power level of a legacy game of Magic is, but it doesn't necessarily mean that only cards legal in Legacy are in the cube. There's some cards that are not legal in Legacy that are present. There's some cards that are legal in Modern that are not present in the cube for power level reasons. Previously, there was actually a card in Standard that wasn't in the cube for power level reasons, but now it's rotated out of Standard. So the rest of the cube is a very aggressive cube. Often when I tell people that, upon playing it the first time, they don't really realize how aggressive it is until they are in a game and they realize that, oh, I didn't take that seriously enough. Usually, you should either be expecting to attack on the second turn of the game or be attacked on the second turn of the game. That doesn't necessarily always happen, but that's something that you should always be prepared for.
Do you see my 6th bullet there? What does it say? Aggressively slanted environment, and I put a question mark on there so I could be passive aggressive in that question. After drafting it, realizing it's super aggressive, continue forward.
It is aggressive, right? So there are no unconditional 4-mana sweepers in the cube. There are some sweepers at 3 mana. There are some sweepers at 5 mana. There's a couple of sweepers with X in them, but there's no unconditional 4-mana sweepers. There's no Damn, no Damnation, no Wrath of God, no Day of Judgment, etc. There are 2 main themes in the cube that are overarching over the entire thing. The first is artifacts. That goes through white, red, and blue. And the second is graveyard synergy, which goes through black and green. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to draft exactly those colors to do those things. But generally, if you want to play a graveyard-based deck, it will need to have at least black or green in it. If you want to play an artifact-based deck, it will need to have at least one of the other 3 colors in it as well. The main thing of the cube is there are no false flags. So as you are drafting the cube, you're not going to be led astray by seeing a card in a pack and thinking to yourself, I wonder if this archetype is supported. The answer is always yes. So the reason that I do this, and I know I'm going over a minute, but now for podcast land, this is something important to explain, because normally I say just get in there. But the reason that I do this is something that was mentioned earlier is because something I value personally in my cube design is I like to be able to take my cube to any play group and have it be accessible. And that's not just from a design standpoint, but that's from a visual standpoint. So all of the cards look like they are in the same group. They all have similar arts. They match. It's really easy to see. I don't have any cards that are textless, so all of the text is described on the card. Everything's in English. And it is very easy to pick up, find some cards that you like, and then narrow in on that focus and be able to pull from the entire cube to make a successful deck. Something that I really love about this cube is it is very, very, very rare for someone to have a deck that they don't feel like is a good deck or they can't win with. So you very regularly see even the deck that goes 0-3 is still a generally powerful deck that just happened to lose 3 games.
So
This
it's
is a cube
the
I've
accessible
curated for
cube.
a very long time.
So
It's accessible. I mean,
It is
I
very
could. That just seems like an easy and almost like effortless way to describe what you just said. It's accessible, and I will say that resonates with me so much, just purely by virtue of the fact that I did a few drafts of this cube on Cube Cobra, and one of the things that always sticks out to me that really does enhance and improve my drafting and almost certainly playing experience is when I don't ever feel like I'm a third of the way or halfway through a draft and I'm looking at the cards and I'm thinking, am I taking something that's even going to be remotely valuable for the deck that I'm drafting? I know that just doing like, drafts on Cube Cobra is not a great representation of what a real world draft might look like, but I always felt like there were choices there and options there. And I don't know what the algorithm is for how the Cube Cobra bots do their drafting, but I always felt that there was something there for me. I always felt that there was either, hey, I can shift a little bit in this direction, or there's some kind of extra little synergy or bonus or whatever I can generate for my deck from these choices. That fact by itself is huge to me. I love it.
I want to go back to the top of the episode because when I was chatting with you about having you on because I wanted to talk about your cube and you this is a reason for this, and you presented the name the Artifact Synergy Cube. Mm-hmm. And I know it's not set in stone and I know it's Parnell's cube, but the reason why right
this very second, by the end of the episode,
it won't be. But I think this is a good point because this is a little bit like self-reflection on myself as I make this statement too, right? So this is a loaded question presented towards you. Some of this is just me looking at a mirror based on my statement that I argued about, like Mystic Confluence being an artifact cube, all the things, right? So I was willing to take that salt and feel that way about that happening in my cube. But then when you presented said name, the Artifact Synergy Cube, the first word I hear is artifacts, right? Mm-hmm. So I take your list and then I try to form questions. And I'm going to read the questions to the listeners right now. And some of these, as I'm seeing them now, realizing how passive aggressive they are on me, wanting to try to invoke some kind of conversation out of you based on that name. It was inspiration for the cube, ? Goals for the cube, ? Those are the soft approaches, kind of leading you up to what I'm doing. Tackling staples in the cube. Going back to, I'm thinking Mirrodin and, previously Kaladesh, right? And what are we doing here, right? Because I'm seeing outliers. So I keep kind of going, highlighting artifact synergies because I tried drafting this cube a couple of times thinking, well, this is an artifact cube. And I'm forcing this draft, which you'll see some in your Cube Cobra list, where I'm literally trying to push this through, seeing all these other cards that I would rather choose because they're more powerful. Do you see what's happening now? This is all based on the namesake so far. And then I put aggressively, sure. It all happened. It kind of just unpeeled.
No, I believe you.
Yeah.
I know. But
it's not your fault. I think it's a fantastic.
It's better if I just give you the
ambiguous shrug is the perfect response to this.
But isn't this a perfect example of how the name has baggage tacked on it? I made so many assumptions by just drafting your cube going, well, Gut's in here, and I know Gut wasn't good in my environment. Why is Justin running Gut? I'm literally thinking this as I'm drafting your cube, not realizing your real intent vis-a-vis the name. That's kind of an underlining tone here.
Maybe the name should be, please read the description cube.
Yes. Yes, read the fine print.
So
the fine print cube. But
the contract cube.
The contract cube.
The contract.
And then you would expect contract
from below, which should be in here.
Yes, it needs to be. You should put that in.
That would be sick in
yes.
I have a copy if you want it. But as I continue, then my list keeps going. Discussion of power outliers, because now I'm probing you, trying to figure out what's this done, right?
Yeah.
And then I ran your
like the whole thing is just based on this name that I arbitrarily decided in 3 seconds.
Correct, and that's naivete.
He's so lost in the sauce.
But no, that's naivete.
I guess just let him cook. We'll let him burn it. It's fine.
But you see kind of what happened. I'm your person sitting down to play your cube for the first time. And I made all these inferences. I just did it.
I think if you're sitting down and playing this cube for the first time, then you've probably heard Justin's explanation for the cube, and you're probably not going this deep into the source about artifacts.
No. But I think that
am I way off on that? I feel like
no
I'm
one has
kinda on
ever
the money.
played this cube without getting my explanation.
Yeah.
Not a single person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I know the people that have played before, so if there's a new person, then I'm going to tell the whole explanation.
It's kind of like what I mentioned earlier, where yes, the naming convention can be important, but it is effectively just a tool. It is just an introduction point. It is something that can take leverage off of your description, but you're always going to give the description to new players.
Right.
And I will say I was kind of looking for it, right? And I actually identified at least a couple of strategies that I thought not just would be powerful strategies, but would be fun, right? This is a common theme throughout our podcast, right? Look for the fun. There was definitely multiple times where I'm thinking, okay, I can see these even sub-themes as far as artifacts are concerned. And obviously now we're learning that this artifact synergy is not even remotely anything.
We're mostly
really
learning that my show notes and
drafting.
questions are literally a moot point, which is making this funny. But
yes,
because I was going.
Okay. Okay. Stop. I've got it.
Do it.
The misunderstood cube. That's
The
it.
misunderstood cube. Excellent.
Well, I'll note
Misunderstood.
that when you went on Cube Cobra to draft this cube, what was the name of the cube?
Parnell's cube.
That's right.
Which
so all that point you think that you were making.
Can someone
all that
explain
point
to
that you were
me
taking up our time for?
why have we approached this entire episode about this artifact?
Because I have in his Discord, he sent me the name of the cube that I click on, and it says the Artifact Synergy Cube. This is...
Yes,
help this man.
The miscommunication cube. Then,
and I understand why you need a name. I understood, but I was like, I got to think of something that's descriptive. And I asked, and people in my playbook are going to listen to this episode. I asked them, and everyone came up with just dog shit names, including myself. So I was just like, all right, that was the least bad one. So I just went with it.
Yeah, I've got a funny one for you.
I got a better one. The UberCube podcast disaster class episode podcast. I think that might even be the best one so
Anthony
far.
makes a script without a point. This is like
Anthony. Here's the thing, though. I'm happy to answer your questions because I do think that they're good questions, despite the name debacle that we're dealing with.
All right.
Because I think that a lot of the questions you've posed are good things to think about in cube design in general. They don't necessarily have to be specific to a cube's what people assume a cube from a title, but even still, let's pretend. Let's all just pretend that I had come up with the best name of this cube possible.
Mm-hmm.
You'd still have these questions because you're still going to be led down this distinct path based on the title, and I think all of these questions are still going to be prevalent because you mentioned gut as an example. There's no name that I could put to a cube that would describe the fact that the card Barb Spike is a very powerful card in this cube, and also gut, whatever the name of gut is, the rest of it
True Soul Zealot.
True Soul Zealot is also in this cube, right? Like there's no title that's going to describe both of those things. Right. Unless it's like Bloody Block Cube and also Guts in here.
That's also a good name. So let me ask you a question. So as I'm doing Pack 1, so this is a challenge. This is a real challenge. So I brought this up recently. We talked about this on Ian's podcast, Cube Reviews. Mm-hmm. And whenever I'm trying to put up a Pack 1, Pick 1, and I know you're not a believer of Pack 1, Pick 1s, but let's pretend we're doing one. We've got a Pack 1, Pick 1, you're 15 cards.
Fun, but yeah.
But they're there. So the prevalence of staples in here versus, say, your counters versus even there's some land matters because I drafted one of those. There's some very powerful graveyard recursion, right? We can get a Traxa and whatnot and recurring nightmare.
Right.
But the prevalence of those as they show themselves, I still see cards like, we'll just say, we'll use Gut, but we'll talk about, let's just say, Headliner Scarlet comes up, right? Pack one, pick one. These cards are hard to avert your eyes from. They're not Moxen, they're not Soul Rings. You do have Jitte in here, which would definitely draw my attention. But when you present these and you have this wide swath of air quote staples, are those taking away from, and I'm talking about real world pack one, pick ones, you're cracking them open, right? Yeah. And people have to choose a direction. How do they avert their eyes from these game winning pieces like Headliner Scarlet, which is a known quantity now?
Right. Great question. So if someone's drafting the cube for the first time, they don't. They're going to take those cards.
Thank you. That's what I was thinking.
And what will often happen is that this comes up literally every time. I mean, in the last probably 2 months, I probably had, somewhere between 8 and 10 new people draft this cube. And that's going to happen all the time. And then in the games, they will often lose to the more cohesive decks that have powerful cards, but don't have the Headliner Scarlet that's like an independently powerful card, but maybe is not a specifically archetypal powerful card. I called out Barb Spike because this is a card that in this cube, because of the cross synergy this card has with many archetypes, like several archetypes, it is a card that is going to make your deck 100% of the time. It's probably going to be in the top half of the cards that are powerful in your deck. And it's a card I've actually, in a weak pack, have drafted it, pack one, pick one, like in a draft, and then 3-0'd that draft.
You're going to make me put it right back in my cube again. I just took it out, Justin. Thank you so much. Now I got to find it.
It's a single card that's aggressive, provides an aggressive body, and it's 2 artifacts. Yep. So there's a lot of functionality going on here. Anyway, point being, what often happens when I tell people about this cube, I give them the description. They don't believe me that the cube is as aggressive as it is. They don't believe me that you need to have a deck that is like has complementary pieces. So like looking at, if you're drafting something, you're not going to be led down a false path of saying, oh, I'm just going to pick the most powerful cards. So what will usually happen is someone will draft that and just like pick kind of the best cards, but not like try to put a deck together that functions as like an actual Magic deck rather than just like a group of cards. And then they lose to the people that have drafted that. And then they go, oh, all right, let me try that again now that I know. And then usually do a little bit better the second time. And that's quite common, especially when you have a group of people drafting that are familiar with the cube and a couple of people that are drafting the cube for the first time, even if they're experienced drafters. And that's kind of just how the environment is built. And I tell people, and everyone always laughs every single time, because I tell people, and I'm like, all these things I just said, you're not going to listen to me, and you're going to go by your normal heuristics for what a cube is. And they do every single time. And then they're like, yeah, I guess it was more aggressive, and I guess I did need to either focus on like one of these two things. So that's quite common.
So going back to the naivete of the name, there's a reason why.
I want to get away from the name.
Well, I'm bringing it up. I'm bringing it up on purpose because I force draft an artifact synergistic deck. I'm going to make this happen, and it's actually included in the show notes. And
yeah, I see the red black one.
It's a damn good deck. Like this is a really good deck.
I'd say this is about a 7 out of 10.
It's a 10 for me because that's all I know is 10. 11 maybe. It's more of an 11. Would you agree that's 11?
Well, unfortunately, you are going to have to play 3 other people, so...
That's my concern. But for the listeners, I curved out at like Chaos Defiler, which I think is really strong. I put in Duretti Scrap Servant. Lodestone Golem is a house.
Is the bottom deck.
Yeah.
Deck?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
I do think that deck is probably like an 8 or a 9. I think this deck is very good. I think the deck before it is solid, but it is not. It doesn't have as much cohesion.
I think Lodestone Golem is a fine card, but I think if you're you've got no acceleration in here, right? Outside of Mox Opal, which you need more artifacts for, and you have a few of them, don't get me wrong, but you are hoping to get Lodestone Golem out on turn 3, and you're probably going to get it out on turn 3.5 to 4. I'm not going to be too concerned about your lodestone golem on turn 4. I'm not going to lie. I ain't too worried because you know what I've done. I've already won already by the time.
Yeah, that goes back to the aggressively slanted. So let's pretend for a minute I did this.
All deck in cube, by the way.
So
that I can see.
Now I want to ask. This is an aggressive cube. As soon as I started drafting, it's aggressive. Would you define it as aggro is the playstyle that is going to be most rewarding for this cube? And I'm talking specifically aggro, like get the creatures out, turn them sideways. Is that, like, if a new player, right, been playing Magic for like 3 weeks, I'm a good player, but I want to play this cube because cube is obviously the greatest format of all time. Do you advise them, like, if you want to maximize your win rate, that you play creatures and turn them sideways?
I would say yes, because the cube is set up for success for people doing that. I'm a big believer, and this is a whole different topic, but I'm a really big believer in, for aggro to be good in a cube, you have to go out of your way to make it good. Because if you simply are just going by the traditional power level of cards now, you're ultimately going to create mid-range decks are going to be the most powerful decks because aggro decks really need redundancy at all of their interaction points to be able to be successful.
Shout out to Sam.
Yeah. So in cube design, you have to go out of your way to say, well, you need to have redundancy, even if it means that the cards are less powerful in context, but context is everything because you're always playing on curve no matter what in a game of Magic. If you're not, you're going to lose.
Yeah.
And it's not combo oriented. So, yes. So in this cube, to answer your question, Stu, I would say that the easiest thing for a brand new player to be like, I haven't drafted cube, new to Magic, saying identify an aggressive deck and play that is probably going to lead to a solid amount of wins. Now, the small caveat to that is combat is harder than people think, and this cube is combat oriented.
So the reason why I love just the last 2 lines especially that speak so much is because aggro as an archetype, I don't want to go into the whole aggro into the weeds. We've done that a million times. But when I was drafting, I find myself sort of considering each of the sort of the pillars of Magic, right? I didn't see necessarily like a degenerate and busted combo finish, right? Like,
there's not
Chain of Smog or
it.
Thassa's Oracle or none of that nonsense, right?
No.
So none of that's in the cube. But what I always consider myself is, if I'm not just going to be playing creatures and turning them sideways, which certainly in the group that I play with, there are multiple people that I know full well that is their strategy 100% of the time. They are going to draft the decks where they play creatures as efficiently as possible and turn them sideways. I don't necessarily favor that strategy as a drafter, but I also want to be cognizant of the fact that the deck that I'm building must not only be able to win, but also must be able to deal with those kind of strategies, right? Because someone, if not multiple people, are going to be drafting decks that want to just bang creatures turning sideways, turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, turn 5, win. And I never felt that was, with the handful of decks that I drafted, I always felt like I had an answer for that. I always felt like I could deal with that and then get to that mid-range to late game, even if it's not like I'm drafting this very specific and purposeful mid-game strategy. I felt that I could deal with that. And I will tell you right now, as someone who feels that way about Cube and Magic in general, this is a massive appeal to me, and one of the reasons why I love this list so much.
I want to add something. We're going to form this into a question for you, Justin. How do you kind of combat mirror matches? You're saying aggro is prevalent, and it is. I've talked about, you've got like the Bombardiers and Gut and Headliner Scarlet. You've got all these really fast attack type of situations. And yes, they'll be divided amongst X amount of players. So I actually would have leaned towards this artifact, Baleful Strix type of strategy, right? The control version. But how many mirror matches do you see prevalent in this cube, and how do you combat that? And if they're aggro mirror matches specifically, and then if they're all aggro mirror matches, do you just call that mid-range to begin with, because now control has the opportunity to step ahead, because you literally find an equilibrium in your aggro that doesn't really progress a game in the right direction?
Well, you're going to hate this answer, but it's all entirely contextual on where one of the people realizes their position in the matchup. I mean, this goes to if we want to talk about probably the most famous Magic article of all time, which is Who's the Beatdown by Mike Flores, is you have to identify in the matchup that you are playing, in a one-on-one matchup, where are you in relation to your opponent? Are you the aggressive deck? Are you not the aggressive deck? The list that you pulled up that'll be in the show notes that tops off with Chaos Defiler and has exactly 3 1-drops, 2 of which are removal spells, Fatal Push and Lightning Bolt, 1 is Ponder. This in this cube is a control deck. And contextualizing how you're going to be interacting with your opponent, given the tools that you have in your deck, is going to provide that answer for you. So it's not as simple as saying there's 2 aggro decks and that's a mirror match because they're like kind of an overlapping colors. That is very rarely the case. Sometimes you have people that are trying to assert themselves as the aggressive deck, and they're trying to push that agenda. And maybe both players doing that at the same time, so you do truly have a racing situation where people are trying to dead the other one before their opponent can. But control decks in this cube look quite non-traditional. Their curves are very low, but the way that they function when you are playing Magic with them acts like a control deck. But if you look at this list, so if you pull this list up and you see this, I only have 1 5-drop in the deck, and you're like, surely this deck that has 2 4-drops and a 5-drop and everything else less, this isn't a control deck. Well, in this cube, it is. So it's really about recontextualizing how you are interacting with the rest of the draft and the rest of the environment, which is something that I think is quite skill testing. So I know it's not a very straight answer, but I think it's the one that is the most realistic.
I like that.
I actually feel like that's a really good way to articulate it. And I'm really glad that you mentioned the who's on the beatdown part, because that's a really important aspect to identifying how aggro is supposed to work as a cube just in a normal situation, let alone when the entire cube is centered around aggro is king. And when you have that identifying factor, when you go into the draft of, hey, aggro decks are the best decks, there are so many different ways to draft aggro, whatnot, then you have to recontextualize yourself in that moment of whether or not you are actually the beatdown.
Right.
And that is where skill-intensive play comes from. The mirror match comes from how people have articulated their sideboard and how they have articulated the way that they can become the beatdown or answer the beatdown.
I think you could even go a step further than that, and it becomes macro versus micro, right? So especially in these aggressive versus like aggro versus aggro matchups, you can look at like macro versus macro, but then micro versus micro even. Like I've got individual aspects of my board presence and the cards in my hand and the abilities that my creatures have, and not just look at it from a macro versus macro, which is where is maybe my entire deck and even my entire hand and even my entire board state might be going towards, but even where my individual creatures themselves might be going towards. And that's kind of where that more micromanagement of the deck and even the drafting process might sort of lead me towards. This is very, very technical stuff, but I feel like that the cube has that capability for you to go from that macro level ability and sort of thought process of drafting to that micro level of playing and management of your resources, where you have to be so particular and so careful like that.
So, Justin, I want to talk about a pacing thing. So we've established an aggressive slant. The observation is real. It's there. We've kind of established that. So I now want to be the control player with intent. That's me. I want to be that person. And other players are going to be that person too.
You might want to be that person, but you're just destroying lands. Okay.
You're not that guy.
Which I did in fact actually do Ramanap in your cube. I did, I tried to strip Mind Lock. I did do that. But I want to lean something a little bit more. I want to be more of a control element, but leaning into the artifacts kind of idea, because that's my vibe. One card that I thought was interesting based on the cadence of your cube. You've got definitely a cadence, right? You're already slapping me. I have to expect that now I'm down by 8, 9, 10 before I begin to do something relevant. But there's a card in here I like that I think could get me back online if I were slow enough and waited. Simulacrum Synthesizer. for 2 colorless and 1 blue, get an artifact. When Simulacrum Synthesizer enters the battlefield, scry 2. Whenever another artifact with mana value 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. So I have to play this. Let's say I play this on curve, turn 3, right? And then now I have to invest 3 mana because I'm hoping I got a good scry there. And I'm going to attempt to put down another construct type of idea and another construct because now I feel like in your cube, based on what I've seen, I should expect that I'm at a low life total. But now I feel like if I do the slow and steady with this idea, right, and I have an ample amount of removal or baleful strix or whatever I can have to try to stymie your speed, I slowed you down for 2 or 3 turns. Stabilization, is that a fair statement here? That
for sure.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to get my legs.
And I think that the deck that you have that you drafted is probably going to do that. Is probably going to do that really well. This is definitely just a survive and then turn the tide. That's a really good card to do it. So I actually like that you pulled that one out. That's a sweet card. That's a really sweet pack 1, pick 1 too, because when you're able to build around it, that card can go absolutely nuts.
Interesting fact about that card is it was featured a little bit for Moto because they do that. Their MTGO, they put it on there to kind of showcase
the new stuff.
Just for a second, right? Yeah. And it was just enough to kind of, I guess,
taint. It spiked like crazy recently.
I have one, and it tainted the well a little bit conversationally with you, where I put it in my artifact cube, and you're like, you got to get that out of there. I actually think it's quite fine in there and probably actually should go back in my artifact cube. I just think the prevalence of it being in Moto kind of set this tension point with Stu. We talked about this.
We did.
That this card's way too powerful to be in your artifact cube, right? I don't.
Well, if your cube is slower,
it is slower.
Well, then it could be.
Could be
then
dangerous.
It's just like it become overwhelming. In this cube, it requires you to play a card for 3 mana that essentially has no impact on the board, and that is a huge ask in this cube to do. Now, the payoff to that here is you start creating 4/4s, 5/5s, at least once a turn, if not multiple times a turn. But in a slower list, if you're not able to regularly like push that aggression, then it does a really good job at incidentally like closing out aggressive decks by only spending 3 mana. If that makes sense. Context of like how dangerous is it to spend 3 mana and do nothing in your cube?
Yeah.
That power level.
And I would argue, actually, Anthony, that your cube has probably evolved enough that that card is a good inclusion in your cube again.
Which is a good segue for this next card based on the ignorance at the top of the episode that Anthony will announce, not understanding and highlighting cards in the list that make no sense. But there was one card. Ultimately, what this came down was envy. It was all envy, Justin, because you had to present certain cards. I'm like, oh my God, he's running this as cube, and I'm not running in my cube. I don't know. Maybe I'm not a very good curator, and I should. But so I'm like, he's running Cyberman Patrol for 2 colorless and Artifact Creatures Cyberman. Artifact creatures you control have afflict 3, 2/2. Yeah. I remember when this card came out. And it was funny because Dan Schneider, that has the Devoid cube, said the same thing I said, that's an insta ban for our cubes. I feel like perhaps maybe my cube has evolved a little inkling past this point, just from that set alone from Doctor Who. But when this card came out, I'm like, oh my God, you run this in an artifact-centric cube? This seems busted. Back to the ignorance of believing your cube. You see where I'm going with this? I'm like, oh my God. So Justin's doing it. It must be okay. I'm going to do it now. I was going to order one today.
I mean, I do think it's fine in this cube. It's like
I don't think it's fine in my cube. Reason. Knowing my cube, that's not fine in my cube. I think Servo shouldn't.
It's a really aggressive card. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. I don't think it's for 2 mana. Oh my God. Gives them a flick 3. Whew.
I think especially when we're talking about the context of gut also existing in this environment and aggro being king and a lot of the gameplay being around getting micro advantages to become the beatdown. I think it belongs in Justin's cube, but does not
in mine.
Yours anywhere.
I think we're slowly naming your cube the gut cube, but
it ain't no gut cube. Come on now.
Yeah,
I would say Gut's probably one of the 10 most powerful cards in the cube.
Well, that and the Bombardiers. Oh my gosh, that card's bonkers too.
I think you're going to have to go a long way before those 2 cards aren't the most powerful cards in a lot of cubes. Like, they are very...
Give it a year and a half, and they'll be an afterthought.
Yeah, well, all right. Well, come back and we'll talk about this in a
your
time
cube
machine,
again and how all these cards are weak. And you're running a pauper cube here in about a year and a half.
Powerful cards. Powerful cards.
So, Justin, we've kind of segued all over the place. We've had a great time with this, but I think for the listeners' idea, when you're going to present this at UberCubeathon, what should they expect? How do they win? That's a good question. How do you win? What would be your winning line
That's
here?
always my question. How do I win that isn't casting gut?
And Bombardiers.
So, I don't even think that Bombardiers is good. Keep in mind, again, that Menace, while it's still a powerful mechanic, it's easier to block with 2 creatures because you'll probably have creatures to block with, or at least you can prepare for that. There's also a really, really high amount of interaction in this cube. I would say above average. So creatures, while still very powerful, like Gut and like Broadside Bombardiers, there's not going to be a game where you're like, oh my gosh, they cast Gut. I wasn't prepared to kill a 3-drop with 2 toughness. That's just like contextually in this cube, like that's something that you are always, you're building your deck to always be prepared for. But I digress. So the answer to the question, how are you winning? I would say that the best way to win, first of all, is just draft Arcbound Ravager. If you can't do that, because I think that's the best card in my personal opinion. Or maybe it's tied with Urza Saga. I think Arcbound Ravager is a little bit better than Urza Saga. So if you can't draft one of those 2, then I would say you really want to try to identify the lane where you can go the deepest on your archetype, because there's a significant amount of overlap between every single color and every single archetype. So things are not going to be just a monolith for what you think your deck might look like. Like I said, there's no false paths, so it is very likely that if you're able to read the draft the best, you're probably going to end up with the best deck. Your pack one, pick one doesn't necessarily just define you. I mean, literally 2 weeks ago when I drafted this cube, I didn't play my pack one, pick one, and 3-0'd the draft. So it is certainly possible, as long as you are dedicated to drafting the archetype or the deck type. I don't want to say archetype because I think that's actually too narrow. But the deck type that you want to draft is probably going to lead you to the most success. And that could be something as simple as I'm getting all of the cards that put +1/+1 counters on my creatures. I'm getting all of the cards that mill my own deck into my own graveyard. That could be I'm going to do as many things that interact with spells, like casting instants and sorceries in a positive way. So it could be as simple as that. But again, most of the time, you're going to be like reaching into other colors or other synergies to grab pieces to help you along the way.
I threw up a pack one, pick one today, actually, on multiple Discords, and it was interesting is people leaned into Atraxa with the hopes and glimmer that I could play your reinforced idea. They were looking at Exhume, even. Exhume was a high pick on multiple Discords, just because they knew Atraxa was in the list. They were picking up those signals of that reanimator.
It's going to be pretty hard for anyone to not sort of put Atraxa on a pedestal based on the notoriety of that card from Vintage Cube, YouTube content, and what like everyone is trying to put, trying to cheat Atraxa into play.
Card.
It's a live 100% exactly.
It's pretty good.
I mean, I would say Atraxa is like a top half of the pack pick, but so there's only, I think, there's 3 cards that you have to dump into the graveyard and then reanimate on your own. All of the rest of the reanimator targets are actually self-binning. So like they're like Troll of Khazad-dûn or Waker of Waves or like Haunter of Misery, the one that like does a little massacre worm and then goes. There's a lot of those, and I've really leaned towards that for reanimator. So it's like self-isolated reanimator. So the 3 cards that aren't are Archon of Cruelty, Atraxa, and Triplicate Titan are the only ones that you have to like actually put more effort into to get into your graveyard. But it does take effort to do.
I do remember there was one card that I wish I saw on this list, and if it's there, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was Felden. I would have loved to have seen Felden in this list.
Felden's just too slow.
Ugh.
Yeah, I had Felden on the list.
But he's got a cane, man.
It's been a few years now, but yeah, he's just too slow, too fragile.
Oh, I love Felden so much. I still run him in every cube pretty much. I run Felden in, I think. It's a pet card, but God, that card's so good.
It is slow, though.
I love that card, too. I tried it. I tried it, but it's just like, it ended up not making it.
So now that we've blown all my entire artifacts show notes out of the water, it was kind of, I think players are actually going to be pretty excited to actually draft this cube now they know it's not artifact centric. It's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting.
I mean, it is. It can be artifact centric.
It is. I just.
The second answer to Stu's question is draft your lands. I have a lot of lands in this cube.
You're singleton, though,
I did
right?
notice that.
You are singleton, though, I noticed.
Fully singleton.
Which makes those fetches pretty powerful, I think.
But the fixing,
a lot of lands.
The fixing is so
Fixing's
good.
Really
You've got the fetches, you've got the surveils, you've got the the shocklands, they're all in there. Like I will say, I never felt like any of the times that I drafted that I was struggling for fixing.
I went strip mine and Ramanap and just called it a day. 6. There is a Lands Matters package.
Ramanap is 3 mana.
It's very subtle. But
like you're already dead if you're trying to cast a 3 mana spell that does nothing.
Again, that's like a control deck, though.
Yeah.
If you can stabilize and then wear them down with strip mine, you have strip mine and wasteland to be able to do that.
All right. Well, May, do you have any final thoughts before we kind of tie this off, and then I'll throw that over to Justin?
How does it feel
Fae in the Parnell
going
cube.
from the cube with no name to having to justify why it's not an artifact synergy cube to the dismay of Anthony?
I went through the desert with a cube with no name.
I drafted my lands in the rain.
So here's what. So I actually asked my play group. So we have. So I live in Richmond, Virginia, and we draft 2 times a week. We draft on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I generally only make it to at most one of those just because of life reasons. But we have a pretty good group. Like last Thursday, we had 14 people, and we did 2 different drafts. This week was a little bit less because we've been dealing with a lot of snow. So we only had 6 people this week. But we still were the largest group in the store. There was not many people there. But anyway. So I've had a lot of people draft this cube. I asked if anyone wanted to provide like a write-up that I would just read so you have some context about this cube coming from not me. Because I kind of feel like that's important. Like this is my favorite cube, it's my baby. I'm happy to hear criticism of it, I'm happy to hear praise of it. The thing that just makes me the happiest is people like interacting with it and then talking to me about it, because I've been making cubes for a long time. I think people know that. I've been, this is 2025, so 16 years that I've been curating cubes myself and made cube content for it for a good chunk of the beginning of that. So this is the cube that I've put the most effort into for sure. I completely rebuilt this cube in 2019. So I had my primary cube that lasted for 10 years. So from 2009 to 2018, and then in early 2019, I was like, you know what? I think I just want to make a new cube and deconstructed my old one and then built this one from scratch. So it's been evolving and getting into the spot that I wanted it to for the last 6 years now. So I'm going to read unprompted. I didn't provide any feedback on this. This is just I was like, hey, I'll be doing a cube podcast tomorrow evening about this cube. If anyone would like to drop quotes about their experience playing it, I'll read them. So to end my portion talking about this cube, I'm going to read 2 comments, and it's only 2 because I'll read the first comment last, and then everyone else was like, well, I can't top that, so that's the only comment. So one of the people said that did decide to write something after I was like, you don't have to be scared about Chris's comment just because it was so so full. I would really call it the nuts and bolts magic cube. Just the right mix of power outliers and archetype linchpins to provide a clear yet dynamic draft experience. Easy to grasp at a surface level for new drafters, and an abundance of depth to keep things fresh after dozens of drafts. And then the other comment from Chris was, I've been drafting cubes on and off since about 2009, and this is the most consistent and fundamentally sound cube I've ever drafted. The design goals are followed to the letter, and even without Justin's rehearsed cube explanation, which I know by heart having heard it more than a dozen times, it's easy to pick up what's going on just from opening a pack. Powerful cards, good synergies, aggressive leaning, no false paths. To me, this is an exemplar cube that every group should aspire to have in their rotation. It is always a joy to play and provides an anchor point to come back to after doing more creative or ambitious cubes. While it's fun to explore the endless variety and artistic expression that is available through cube design, there are only so many ornithopter cubes, graveyard synergy cubes, color-restricted cubes, or other fringe things that you can do before you start to say to myself, yeah, I'm ready to go back and draft Justin's cube again.
Wow.
Mic drop, and it's now...
My goodness.
Nope. It's the exemplar cube. Oh my god.
No.
Oh my god.
First
Oh my
sentence says it
god.
all. The nuts and bolts cube.
I think
The exemplar cube
I think
is
yeah,
money.
the nuts and bolts cube.
No.
is
Nuts and
pretty
bolts
good.
cube.
Exemplar cube is money.
The exemplar cube is more exciting. That's like, ooh, what's this?
Yeah.
There.
It's like, did you
Okay.
drink from the right cup, or is it going to make you melt? Right? It's like very indie.
No, we're not calling it the Indiana Jones cube, Anthony, or the
You
Temple of
chose. You
Doom
chose
cube.
correctly, cube.
No.
All right, so this will be featured at UberCubeathon, which I'm super excited about, and I'm hoping you bring this to Charlotte because I'm going to bring my less great cube so we can play that one too.
No, just leave them at home. We'll just play this cube.
We're just going to play this one over and over
Yeah,
again.
absolutely.
We can
Yeah,
shoot.
I love
100%.
this cube. I'll draft this. I will bring this cube to Charlotte. I'm only going to bring one of my 3, but it'll be this one.
I'll bring my Fem cube because you haven't drafted that one yet, and I think I'm pretty proud of that one. Are you familiar with that one? Well, you will be. It's beautiful. So, other than that, we're actually going to say we're moving to our socials. Thank you, JP, for joining us.
All right. First of all, to Patrick, to Jeff Stumpo, to Nick Lapointe, Chris Fitzgerald, Timber Dragon, Brian Christensen, Keaton Schultz, Lord Justice, Nick Lapointe, Preston, and Sam McKenna. I want to give a huge thank you to all of our Patreons. I have a new mic stand.
We got new microphones. They sound pretty good.
We got
and
new
Stu
mics.
actually
We
figured them
do.
out after, like,
I
I don't know, 2
know.
months. We finally got stereo.
It's so exciting.
Oh, my God.
We do.
So thank you for doing that. And as we mentioned, we're going to be at UberCubeathon. Justin's going to join us outside of Charlotte. We're going to do that one too, but 64 players, 17 cubes.
The Gathering Place,
Swiss.
Chapel Hill,
It's
North
going to
Carolina.
be really fun. And it's a whole weekend thing, by the way. You know, Chapel Hill's got the best basketball teams. You know that, right, Justin?
Oh, the women's? Yeah, they're pretty good.
No, you did that. You did that. Cool. They're pretty great. I'm all about
They're,
UNC.
what, they're ranked 12th.
They're
in the
ranked
number-
nation.
yeah, yes, they are.
They literally are.
The men's team does have a winning record barely, so that's good. Hang your hat on that, right?
And UberCube is a TCG affiliate link. So we talked about a lot of cards during this episode. I will include within the show notes, there is a cool little button that you can click on. This has kind of been its own little problem in itself because a lot of these things that people have done went out to the void. But click on the button within the show notes, and I will also copy and paste for those people using Spotify and whatnot. But if you're making an order for some of these magic cards we talked about, it goes a long way. 0 effort on your part. Click, order, kind of done, and there we are. And also, you like to make fun of me a lot.
I don't make fun of
You
you.
a little bit. You do
I
make fun of
never make fun of you.
me. I am an admin on a Facebook page. Everybody loves the good Facebooks, aka Meta. But it's groups, MTG Cube. It's actually a really great group we've got going on. There's 1,000 members now. So it's pretty sweet, and people are really nice. So if you want to join that, and you still do the Facebooks, aka Metas, and I know there's a lot of things behind that. As May kind of your eyes are kind of tilting here a little bit at me, but that's okay because these people are nice. And so if you want to participate, come on and join us. We do pack one, pick ones. People ask what should I do with this cube? It's pretty clean. It's family friendly, so we enjoy it. Other than that, I'm gonna let Stu talk a lot because his accent's better.
All right, you can find us at Twitter at UberCubeMTGPod. You can also find us at Bluesky, UberCubeMTGPodcast.bsky.social. You can reach us via email if you've got a longer question or comment about this episode or anything else, UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. And as always, that Discord is popping, baby.
It is mostly Magic Pets, not your thing, but my thing. Deck Bows is
All right,
pretty
fine.
medium, but people like cute cats and dogs.
That's
So it's
fair
pretty
enough.
great.
All right, patreon.com/UberCube if you want to directly support the channel. Big appreciation again to all of our Patreons. And you can also find us on YouTube at UberCube MTG Podcast 747 because we're just like
We're
the
jumbos,
jumbos, baby.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time on those things.
Oh, good
like this
job.
week, actually.
Well done.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
Well done.
Yeah, we got
All
bad
right.
Wi-Fi.
And we're going to say what we always say here.
We love Justin Parnell, and our cube has no name.
Happy
Aggro.
cubing with a horse with no name.
Oh, no.
Drafted my cube in the rain.
So the interesting thing is when I said that I rebuilt this cube in 2019 from the ground up. It did not initially have a strong artifact theme in the cube. Like that wasn't one of the core conceits of the cube at all. Like it just, I would say, had the average amount of artifacts like that every other kind of medium legacy cube did. However, I was trying, as many of us that have cubed for a long time, especially that have made cubes for a long time, I was trying to make green-white a reasonable two-color combination and was really struggling on that. Because historically, especially in cube design, that green-white has been like largely a two-color combination that doesn't have a strong identity that is easy to replicate in cube. Like a lot of times, green-white in constructed is really put on by having like multiples of things. So like, like Collected Company or like Squadron Hawk or things that are like you want a lot of redundancy. So that's hard to do in green-white. So I was like, I think that counters is the thing that I could probably make work the most. So I put counters in. It wasn't quite there. I kept pushing it up. And then I'm like, a direction that I could take this is I could add a bunch of artifact creatures that also care about counters, so you have some like soft landing on either side of green or white in case you don't quite make it there with just the green and the white cards. And it worked so well immediately that I was like, well, what if I just keep adding to this and I can really spread the breadth of like the artifact representation? And then it kept growing to then being a huge portion of the cube. So artifacts wasn't like the intended goal of this cube. It was because I was trying to actually make green-white good. And the way that I did that is through the artifact section. So, and that's where we ended up.
So you wanted it to be Uber Bear's artifact cube ultimately, correct? Just hit pause. Don't record them anymore.